Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and today the Commander 26 deck lists have been released by Wizards of the Coast. So we have the list for all 5 of the decks that will be coming out November 11th, and this is always one of my favorite products of the year. Last year I had a lot of fun looking at these decks, talking about them before they came out, and then of course actually sitting down and playing them. We're going to do a similar thing this year. We're going to look at each deck list, we're going to talk about the new cards in each deck, give you some quick evaluation of those, and we'll look at all the reprints. I'll go through those a little bit quicker since you'll be familiar with a lot of the cards, but basically hopefully give you an idea of what this product's all about. And if you're thinking about buying one of these decks or maybe 2 of the 5, these videos will help you decide which one you might like and which one kind of fits your playstyle. The important thing to remember with Commander is play the deck that you are excited about. Like, don't try to evaluate like which one is stronger or better. If you play the deck that's going to be the most fun for you, then you can always move different cards in and out and make it stronger. But having said that, I do think that this is a pretty strong deck so far. From what I've seen, this looks like a pretty good build, and it goes really well if you happen to buy the Simic deck from last year. I think there's a lot of consistencies between the two. You might be able to form some sort of hybrid deck with the two. Could be kind of fun. Now, quickly, before we get started with the deck list evaluation, if you check out the description below, you're going to see some links to our Amazon affiliate store. If you make any purchases through those links, including some of the Commander products out there, then a small percentage will come back to help the channel. That's always appreciated. Also, thank you to all the patrons on Patreon. That's another way you can help support the channel. Without the patrons and without the folks looking at the Amazon links, quite honestly, we wouldn't be able to do this. So thank you all. Can't tell you how much it means. Having said that, let's get into the cards for today. All right, we're going to start off with the 15 brand new cards that you'll find when you buy this product, and then after that we'll look at the reprints. So let's start off with your potential commanders. We're going to begin with Atrexa, Praetor's Voice, and this is a green, a white, a blue, and black commander. So you're going to find here basically the concept of this particular deck is it's got everything but red. So what is red's weakness? Well, one of red's weaknesses is simply that it doesn't have a lot of ability to create like +1/+1 counters. So guess what? This is what this deck's trying to do. It's doing things by growing the creatures and having the counters kind of matter with certain cards, and just a lot of easy ways to double counters and stuff like that. So it's actually a really intriguing deck. It seems like a ton of fun to play. Having said that, this maybe is one of my favorite commanders out of the 5, quite honestly. On paper, I mean, it's a simple concept. 4/4 with flying, vigilance, death touch, lifelink. Oh, and by the way, at the beginning of your end step, you also get to proliferate. Proliferate, probably one of my favorite mechanics of all time. I just think it's awesome because it can do so many crazy interactions with a lot of cards out there. It can interact with loyalty counters on planeswalkers. Of course, it can do +1/+1 counters. It can do -1/-1 counters on your opponent's creatures. It can do things like experience counters if you play with some of last year's experience cards from the last year's product. It can mess around with poison counters, right? Like, it can just do so many weird things. But what's really intriguing about this card is on paper, I mean, it's good. A 4/4 flyer with all those abilities is phenomenal. I also love the fact that they kind of line the abilities up with the colors, like flying for blue, vigilance has white, death touch with green, lifelink with black, right? But the whole concept of this deck is about making things bigger. So a 4/4 with all those abilities is awesome. Well, guess what? A 5/5 is even better, and a 6/6 is even better, and a 7/7 is even better. So this deck has a lot of possibilities anyway to make this a very large creature that's not only attacking in for some crazy damage, but also gaining you life too. This is really cool. Now, if you're familiar with this product, you know that they typically give you one kind of suggested commander, and then they give you some like backup commanders, so you can trade them out every once in a while to mix things up. They're doing that again this year, and this card as well as these other commanders are all going to be foils, so you'll get 4 foils in each pack. But this time we're seeing something a little different. So let's look at Aishe Ojutai Dragon Speaker. This is a legendary creature. You can use it as your commander, and it has partner, which means you can have 2 commanders if both have partner. So you're going to see that in this deck we have 1 allied partner, and we're going to have 2 of the enemy colored partners. So let's look at this one first. Quite honestly, this one isn't super exciting for me. It's actually not bad in this deck, just because there's so many ways to get +1/+1 counters on things in this deck, right? So when you play this, you can start throwing counters on it. When your opponents cast spells, it's going to give it more counters. It can sort of snowball after a while. It does have flying, so it has evasion, which is pretty nice. You're going to see a lot of flyers in this deck too, which makes sense considering blue and white are 2 of the colors in the deck. Now, here's where I think the card comes up a little short, though. If I have trouble getting counters on it right away, it's just really easy to remove this card. And it costs 4, which paying 4 for a 1/1, granted, it has great upside, but it just doesn't feel super good to me. Granted, if my opponent's going to try to hit it with direct damage or something, they are instantly going to have to do at least 2 points of damage, because casting their spell is going to give it a +1/+1 counter, so you can't do like a ping to it. You're going to have to hit it with like a shock. And granted, as it gets bigger, it's harder and harder to deal with, but if they can deal with it, or if they just have spout removal, like destroy a creature, then I'm just kind of right back where I started. And I can cast this thing again for 6, but now it's got no counters on it. I have to start all over again through that whole process, and it seems just very time consuming in a lot of ways. Like I said, I think it's fine in this deck because the deck enables it in a lot of ways, but in a vacuum outside of this deck, this is probably not one of my favorites. The sad part is, if you choose to go the partner route with this out of the box, then you kind of have to use this one, because if you want to use one of the enemy colored ones, you have to choose this. Granted, you don't even have to cast this. You can just sit in your command zone. But the other ones actually feel a little better to me. All right, let's look at Ikra Shadiqui the Usurper. Now, this one, of course, is Golgari colors, enemy colors. And this is interesting to me because it's a 3/7 with Menace. Now, if it can do combat damage to a player, you also gain life based on the toughness, but you also get that ability for all your creatures as long as this is in play, which could potentially be a lot of life gain, right? In the right circumstance. So as these cards are being spoiled, we started seeing some cards that felt like, okay, maybe there's a little bit of a Toughness Matters theme here, but quite honestly, the Toughness Matters theme is basically this card. Now, the good news is it's in a deck where you can make giant creatures with +1/+1 counters, so you're not going to see a lot of like 1/10s or anything in this particular deck, but what you will see is just a lot of maybe like 5/5, 6/6s, that type of thing. And yeah, eventually that adds up. You can actually gain a tremendous amount of life with a card like this. So I think this is definitely a fun take on this deck and one way you can go about things. And finally, our last partner is Rayhan, Last of the Abzan, and this is a whole other way to go about things. This is probably my favorite of the partners, actually. Now, this costs a little bit less, where you paid 5 for the previous card, but it had a really big kind of splashy effect on the board. This one doesn't affect the board as much as it affects the individual card, but the upside is you can play this more frequently and earlier in the game because it only costs 3. So when this comes into play, you get 3 +1/+1 counters on it, and now everything is the ability. If it dies or it goes to the command zone, then you basically get to take off those counters and put that many counters on another target creature. Now, you can't sprinkle them around the board or anything, but still, at least the counters kind of survive, which is nice. So when you play this, you're introducing 3 counters into the ecosystem. When this goes back to the command zone, you play it again, you're introducing another 3 counters. So as long as your opponent doesn't say have like a board sweep that you don't have an answer for, and there are some good answers for those in this deck, or they can't like start pinpoint destroying this and then a bunch of other creatures at one time, you start to get into a really nice place with a lot of growth, right? So it's actually a pretty cool concept, and I would like to try that out. It seems like it could be really fun. All right, let's move on to the regular cards. And the first one is Orzhov Advocist. I think this is a fine card to just kind of help build your board state. I mean, it's nothing super flashy. It costs 3, but you're basically getting 3/6 power toughness on the board, either making this a 3/6 or coming in with a 1/4 and then putting 2 +1/+1 counters on something else. Now, the weird part of this card is your opponents all get the opportunity to put 2 +1/+1 counters on one of their creatures, but if they do, then they can't attack you that turn. So that's interesting. Now, I don't know how defensive that really is, because let's face it, if an opponent thinks they can take you out on their turn, they're just not going to put the 2 counters on there, right? But what's kind of cool is, as long as they don't think they want to take you out that turn, they take the counters, and now they have bigger creatures to maybe attack each other with, at least for a turn cycle, before they start thinking about attacking you again. And this is one of the many, many cards you're going to see that really helps encourage aggressive gameplay in these multiplayer games. They did this in Conspiracy Take the Crown, and it was very, very successful to prevent really stalled out board states. They're doing it here. So especially if you want to play these decks right out of the box, hopefully there's enough cards, and it looks like there are, that you won't have big gummed up board states. There's a lot of cards that are really encouraging some action early and often, and this is one of them, and you'll see a lot more. Deep Glow Skate. Okay, this card's actually awesome. Like, the more I look at this, the more I like it. Like, it kind of has this feeling very similar to Doubling Season in a way, but it's on a creature. It happens when it comes into play. But here's the deal. Like, you can flicker this thing, you can bounce it, play it again. There's just all sorts of things to really exploit this ability, and it's doubling, I should say, counters on any number of target permanents, not just yours, but it could be opponents as well. And it's permanent, so it can hit planeswalkers, double their loyalty counters, so it'd be really awesome if you're playing with a lot of planeswalkers. You can double, of course, your +1/+1 counters. That's what it's trying to do for the most part in this particular deck. But even if you have things like charge counters like mana battery lands, or charge counters on artifacts, or anything like that, you get to double them. If your opponent has -1/-1 counters on their creature for some reason, you can double those. Like, it just does so much, and the fact that you can bring it back and forth or blanket, it just feels like this thing could be exploited pretty bad. Again, this deck probably not using it to the best of its abilities, but it's still going to be really, really good with all the +1/+1 counters running around. Sublime Exhalation. I talked about this a lot when they first showed this card, and I really like the Undaunted effect. What I love about it is they found a way to make a very powerful card in a multiplayer environment, but it's not necessarily powerful in a one-on-one environment. But I think that's really eloquent design. I feel like here's a board sweep that early on could be potentially very cheap and affordable. Later, once opponents start going out of the game, it becomes more expensive, but who cares at that point, because you should have enough mana to cast this if you need to, right? Board sweeps are going to be great panic buttons, obviously, especially in multiplayer games. Now, they do set this deck back a little bit, although there is at least one way to defend yourself against that. We'll see it a little bit later, but if you lose all your creatures in a deck like this, it's going to take you a little time to build up, unfortunately, and other players may be able to build up quicker. So just be careful. I mean, board sweeps feel like they could be a little bit awkward with this deck. Manifold Insights. This was introduced a couple days ago, and when I read it, my brain glitched on the non-land part of it. So it's actually even better than I thought it was at that time, but it's a very good card regardless. I mean, just the fact that it only costs 3, and you can look at the top 10 cards of your library. Now your opponents get to choose. They each pick one that you get to keep, but it's a non-land card, so it has to be some sort of action. It's actually a really strong card. Sure, it might be a tad awkward if you draw this when it's down to you and one other player, but you're still cycling it for something, even if it's the worst of your 10 cards. I mean, you're at least seeing another card, right? So it is what it is in that case, but most of the time it's really good. I was joking around yesterday about, I want to play this in that 11-player Commander game, because then it's really going to be a house. And yeah, it's going to be a really cool card regardless. Just a lot of fun. All right, next we have Migratory Route. I love cards like this. This is maybe one of my favorite cards in the deck, and it seems maybe a little odd for me to say that, considering we've seen big splashy cards. This one's a lot simpler, but that's what I like about it. It's very simple but very powerful, especially in conjunction with some of the other cards. There's a lot of enters the battlefield effects in this deck. We're going to see some as we go forward, and playing this card will give you 4 enters the battlefield effects, which is kind of awesome. And on top of that, it has basic land cycling. Now, basic land cycling has always been a really good item to put on a card, especially in a limited environment like a Conspiracy, or even in Modern Masters and stuff like that. And it really helps you go deeper in like draft games and even sealed games and go more colors and stuff like that. Here they're making all new basic land cycling cards, and this is a great opportunity to do that. And I'm sure these cards are going to be reprinted in Conspiracy products and Commander products, and maybe even some of the Masters products in the future, just because this is a great tool. And I feel like they kind of exhausted all their old land cycling cards. Like, we see them all the time. So it's cool that we get some new ones. And obviously it was kind of needed, because this helps you play a 4-color deck, right? The effect on this card, very, very powerful. I'm a sucker for these cards. I love Lingering Souls. It's cool that these are bird tokens and not spirit tokens, though. It's kind of a throwback to the old days a little bit, which is kind of cool. The art's amazing. But yeah, if you like those 1/1 flyers style decks, this is an awesome card. I mean, I love Lingering Souls. I won a tournament with that card. So this card feels like something I really want to play. Next, we have Grip of Pyreses. Now, I'm not going to say that there's a whole lot of cards, or new cards at least, in this product that I feel like will cross over into like Legacy or Vintage or anything like that. But this is one card that has some potential. I think this could be a sideboard card, maybe in Legacy, maybe even Vintage. Here's what it has going for it. I mean, first off, the ability is great. It's going to let you steal an equipment card, and there's a lot of powerful equipment cards that float around in some of the Eternal formats. I mean, anything from Batterskull to Swords and Umezawa's Jitte. I mean, just really strong cards like that. You can steal them, and I love the fact that they brought back the Germ Token. Like, I think the Germ Token's an awesome idea because they're just dabbling with it here. You're not going to see it on any other cards, but it's just kind of cool that you're able to get a piece of equipment. And granted, the token has Summoning Sickness, but at least you know you can block with it that turn. You don't have to pay any additional mana to equip. That's pretty awesome, I think, especially in this case where you're paying 3 anyway to steal something. You can do this at instant speed, so that's very important too, and it can almost work as a combat trick of sorts at times. And what's really nice for Eternal formats is it's blue. And of course you can pitch it to Force of Will and stuff like that, so it has a secondary use to it. So keep an eye on this one. This could have some legs, but regardless, still a great commander card. Ancient Excavation. I really like this concept right here. Basically, this is a lot like a Windfall, but you're paying an additional black, and you're getting a lot of stuff out of that. So first off, for the additional black, you're getting to see all the cards before you discard. So where Windfall, you just discard your hand, draw that many new cards, and actually everybody at the table does it, so it's a symmetrical effect. This time around, you get to draw the cards before you discard, and then you just have to discard as many as you drew so you can keep the best stuff. Oh, and by the way, it has basic land cycling. So if you're in a pinch and you need another color, you can simply toss it to that. Awesome card. Also an instant, so you can hang on to your mana if you have a counter spell or something in your hand and just wait till it's about to be your turn to use it. Awesome. Silvan Reclamation, another fine card. Instant speed, gets rid of up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments, and it also has basic land cycling. I feel like 5's a good cost for this. In fact, 5 might be a little aggressively costed for this. Like, I'd pay 6 for this and be happy, quite honestly. But 5's fine, I'll take it. And it's a very good card. Helps you deal with a lot of problems. Next we have Duelist Heritage. Now, typically, I'm not a huge fan of enchantments that hit the board and don't really do anything on their own, but I'm a little more forgiving of that in a multiplayer environment because you do have a little more flexibility and you can take things a little bit slower sometimes. And this is actually a cool card for a couple of reasons. One, you play this for 3, and then you attack, and you can give something double strike. That's actually cool. Keep in mind, though, it doesn't have to be your creatures. Whenever one or more creatures attack, you may have target attacking creature gain double strike. So when your opponents attack each other, you can just start, oh, you know what? Let's give that double strike. Oh, you're attacking someone with that? Let's give that double strike. You know, that's actually kind of cool. So you get double strike, you get double strike, y'all get double strike. So I love it. This is an awesome idea. And it plays into just the political aspect of the game a little bit. You know, hey, you know what? I'm going to help you out. I'll give that creature double strike. Since it's not coming at me, I'll give it double strike. And guess what? You're still coming out on top because they're attacking somebody else with it. You know, so awesome card. A lot of fun for multiplayer. Great idea. Crystalline Crawler, great mana fixing, fantastic mana fixing, especially in this deck where counters are going to be very abundant. But you can play this. It has Converge, so it gets +1/+1 counters based on how many colors you paid into it. So up to 4, it could be a 5/5 potentially coming into play, which is not a small creature. But more importantly, it does tap to get more counters, much like Hangerback Walker does. But what's really cool is you can remove all the counters at once if you want, basically, to get 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So this works as a mana battery too. So you can just start accumulating counters on this thing. And then if you need to pay out a lot of mana at any given time of any color, this card will help you do that. That's actually kind of awesome. I think this is one of those cards that's going to cross over into being one of those just commander staples that you see almost all the time. And our last new card of the day is Ash Barrens. It's not very complicated, but it's a cool, elegant design. I mean, late in the game, if I have my colors, okay, it's a land. If I need a color, I cycle this for the basic land I need. That's actually kind of awesome. Great placeholder for sure if you need color fixing. All right, so those are the 15 new cards that you'll get in this product. Let's look at the reprints. Now, the reprints, granted, I will go a little faster through these because a lot of them you'll be familiar with, but I'm always excited to see what reprints they add in these products. That's part of the fun for me, to see which old cards come back, and some of them even have new art, which is pretty cool. All right, so let's get started with creatures. We have Abzan Falconer. Obviously, this card is all about taking those creatures that have now the +1/+1 counters and letting them fly. And this is another way to speed up games, eliminate board stalls, and just hopefully let you get in there for some damage against the last opponent or two. Custodies Soulbinders. This was from the first Conspiracy. Now, if you ever played this in Conspiracy, you know how powerful this is. This card's kind of a house for 4. Like, I used to love playing this. I used to hate when someone would play this on the other side of the battlefield. But basically, it comes into play with X+1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield, which is pretty massive sometimes in a multiplayer game. And then you have the ability to pay mana to convert those +1/+1 counters into 1/1 spirit tokens with flying. So this is another way to explain enters the battlefield effects by entering the battlefield with some of these tokens. It also helps you eliminate board stalls by giving yourself a chance to go wide in the air later in the game if you need to, or if you want to go tall, it can do that too. This card is real hard to deal with. Fantastic card. Elite Scale Guard. Nothing huge to say about this card. It's just another way to help keep the game moving and try to prevent board stalls. Next we have Revel Arc, and this is one of the classic cards. You've seen it printed probably a number of times now in these type of products, but it's a fantastic card. I mean, 4/3 flyer for 5 is great, and oh, by the way, when it dies, you get to take up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. That's pretty awesome. And if you just desperately need to get those creatures out of the graveyard and on the battlefield, you can also play it for the evoke cost. So this card does a lot. It's versatile, very good inclusion. Thrumming Bird, this is another one that just looks like it's not going to do a whole lot, but can take over a game sometimes. It can proliferate, can be very powerful. This is the second of 3 cards in this deck that have it, and when it works really well. Now, if you can get across damage and start proliferating anything on your side of the board, or even sometimes things your opponents have, so much value can be found here. It seems innocuous. I mean, a 1/1 for 2 with flying just doesn't seem that threatening, but really, once this thing gets going, it just starts to snowball. It's really crazy. Bane of the Living. So this can be a creature, or can also double as a -X/-X board sweep. Now what's nice about that is the -X/-X board sweeps are going to allow you to keep your big creatures, and hopefully you'll have some big creatures due to all the counter production that you have. So this kind of works well in this deck. As a matter of fact, you're going to see another -X/-X sweeper coming up. Next is Fester Creep, and very similar effect to the previous card. This one may be a little more mana intensive and takes a little more build up to make it happen, but it can still do a very similar thing. Necro Plasm. Now this one feels a little weird to me in this deck because this is destroying creatures based on converted mana cost and not by size. So you can't kind of outrun it with your counters. So your small creatures are just going to get wiped out regardless of how many +1/+1 counters are on there. Also, you have tokens in this deck. Now, not a ton of token generation, but definitely enough where this thing wipes out tokens pretty quickly. Great if you're going up against a token strategy, no doubt, but it just feels a little strange in this deck. Like, I feel like a lot of times this card won't be good to play, or else it will backfire on you. There are times where this probably totally will make sense depending on board state, but this is probably one of the first cards I would take out and replace with something else, quite honestly. Champion of Lam Vault. Here's a good example. You got a 3 casting cost creature that could be actually quite big. And this one's great because whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on this. And then creatures with power less than this creature's power can't block creatures you control. So not just this creature, but all creatures. And that can get kind of crazy. And again, is another way to speed up the game and make sure that you're still being aggressive. Next, we have Forgotten Ancient. Great utility card for this deck. I mean, exactly what it's trying to do, right? Every time a player casts a spell, including yourself, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on this, and then at your upkeep, you can move those counters around basically wherever you want. Really awesome card. And this was one of the first, actually the first, you make the card cards they did on their Magic the Gathering website to let people kind of vote on each aspect of the card. So that's kind of cool history, too. Colognian Hydra. I remember playing with this in Limited. It's actually kind of a house because you can attack in basically with like an 8/8 Trampler for 5 mana. Like, it seems really strong. And on top of that, it gives that effect of doubling the +1/+1 counters on attacking creatures you control to everything. So, I mean, it's not just doubling its own counters when it attacks, but everything else gets the same effect. This thing is actually very powerful, and even though, yes, it has Summoning Sickness, when it hits the battlefield, the effect might be good enough for you to put away an opponent. Really cool inclusion here. Next, we have Tuskguard Captain, so another Outlast card. This time around, +1/+1 counters will give creatures trample. So we saw flying earlier to help with board stalls. Now we've got trample. We'll do the same thing for you. Scavenging Ooze, another card that's going to give you +1/+1 counters. This will also gain you some life. As far as I can think off the top of my head, there's not a whole lot of graveyard matter stuff going on. The artifact deck, I think, does have a little bit of it. So exiling cards out of the graveyard might not mean too much, at least playing these right out of the box. But having said that, this is a fantastic card. This was originally printed in a Commander deck, and at that time it was a very popular card because it turned out to be pretty good in other formats, and later it was reprinted in a core set, thankfully. And here it is again. So again, a little bit of history there. Fathom Mage, an evolved card, and this is a good card draw spell. You got a couple good card draw spells in here just to keep the action moving. This is one of them. Master Biomancer, this can take over a game. Like, when you start throwing +1/+1 counters on this, and then other creatures enter the battlefield with +1/+1 counters based on its power, like, this can get out of control really quick. And think about some of those tokens that we saw earlier. We saw 2 cards that generate 1/1 flying tokens, right? Whenever they enter the battlefield, they get affected by this. That's actually pretty huge. It can be a big game. Vorel of the Hulklade. This was from Dragon's Maze. I feel like this is one of those cards that kind of was lost, but I feel like it doubles the number of each kind of counter, but only on target artifact, creature, or land, so it can't hit planeswalkers, and I think that's why it just never really kind of went over the top. But I do see it played in Commander. It definitely helps with +1/+1 counters like it will in this deck, and it does also deal with things like charge counters and battery land counters and stuff like that. So it is very versatile. It will be really good in this deck. Corpsejack Menace, another way to kind of play the doubling game with counters. So basically, anytime something's going to get a +1/+1 counter, as long as this is on the battlefield, it's going to get twice that many. I mean, doubling is a powerful effect, and we've seen a number of cards now that do it. You can really run away with a game when you start doubling counters, like not adding an extra one, but actually doubling them. That can get kind of nuts kind of quick. Vulturous Zombie. This card's actually really awesome. Like, you play this, it's a 3/3 flyer for 5, but whenever a card is put in an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So if they're discarding cards for some reason, or if they get milled or what have you, like, that all leads to counters going on this creature. Now, this deck doesn't take advantage of those things, but that's okay, because just playing fair Magic in a game of multiplayer, guess what? A whole bunch of stuff's going to the graveyard. So this will get kind of crazy kind of quick as well, and it has evasion built in, which is nice. Enduring Scalor, another card with evasion. This one costs a little more, but at the same time, whenever one or more +1/+1 counters goes on another creature, this gets a +1/+1 counter. So it's going to grow pretty quick in this deck, and again, has evasion. Juniper Order Ranger, kind of like the last card, but on steroids. This time around, it's not going to have flying or evasion, unfortunately, but every time you play a creature now, this gets a +1/+1 counter, and that creature gets a +1/+1 counter. Again, works really well. It's another good enters the battlefield effect for those token generation cards. Guru of Spores. This one's from a previous Commander deck. It's never been reprinted, so it's kind of cool to see it here. It does enter the battlefield with 5 counters on it. And then you can kind of move counters around in a, I guess, similar way to Forgotten Ancient. It's just a lot more mana intensive to do so, but you can do this one on the fly, which is kind of interesting. So, and it also makes tokens, which again, bringing a token onto the battlefield, if you have some of those enters the battlefield effects, could be really good for you. Tezzeret's Gambit. So this is the third and final Proliferate card that you're going to find in the deck, but it's a good one. Get to draw 2 cards, and hey, why not play with some Pyrexia mana? That's always awesome. Nice economical twist to this card. Treasure Cruise. Hey, everybody, remember Treasure Cruise? Well, it's back. And you know what? Treasure Cruise is awesome. Great inclusion. It's not broken in Commander. I mean, just because Commander's just a bigger game with bigger stuff going on and more players, so drawing 3 cards isn't going to tip the scales as much as it does in a one-on-one game. But really great inclusion that you can play this potentially relatively cheap and later in the game, and it's just going to help you draw into some heat. Languish. Okay, I promise you see another minus power, toughness, board sweep effect. Well, here it is. It's Languish. Again, completely makes sense in the style deck. Spitting Image. This one's from Eventide, I believe, and If you've never played with this card, this actually is a fantastic late game card. Like, when you're just trying to draw into some heat and you keep getting lands, like, these retrace cards are awesome, and this one's a very powerful one. I mean, for 6 mana, you get to copy target creature. Again, you're getting a token, you're getting hopefully an entrance battlefield effect, and this is fantastic when you draw that land instead of what you really wanted. Oh, I can still do something really good with this. So this can be very strong, especially when you're down to, like, the last opponent. Merciless Eviction, another good answer card. This time you get to choose to exile either all artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or planeswalkers. So it's a very specific way to deal with the problem that's facing you at that point. Now, it is symmetrical. Obviously, if you choose creatures, you're going to lose your creatures, but I do think you're going to more often probably choose artifacts, enchantments, or planeswalkers, considering the build of this deck. Dune Blast, this actually works in a very interesting way with this deck. Now, like I said earlier, this deck is kind of weak against board sweeps in a way, but if you sweep all the other creatures but keep your best one, especially later in the game, that actually could be just good enough to squeak out the win. So it does make sense here, I think. Disdainful Stroke, good counterspell to deal with that card that's just going to wreck your strategy. When you're building an army with tokens, it takes a little bit of time, it takes a little finesse, and you don't want somebody to come out with the Wrath of God, right when you start getting stuff going. So you have this to deal with it. It only deals with mana cost 4 or greater, but that's going to keep you safe for the most part from board sweeps. Inspiring Call, great combat trick, really makes sense in this deck. I mean, you're getting attacked in, you can go ahead and play this, you get to draw a card for each of your creatures that have a +1/+1 counter, hopefully it's a fair amount. You might find an answer in those card draws, and even if you don't, your creatures are indestructible to end of turn, you can defend yourself. Awesome, awesome card. Solidarity of Heroes, another doubling card. This time it's going to double just +1/+1 counters, but you get to target a number of different creatures with it. So if you just pay the 2 casting costs, you can target 1 creature, but if you pay 4, then you can target 2, 6, you can target 3, and so on and so forth. So this can be very powerful, especially later in the game. Also, should mention it's an instant, so it's a fantastic combat trick. Mirror Weave, another good combat trick. This is a really fun card if you've ever played with this before. I believe it was from Shadowmoor, if I'm not mistaken. But you get to choose a creature. All your creatures become a copy of that creature till end of turn. So there's just different weird situations where that becomes really good for you. Like, for example, if you have a creature that gives an entrance to the battlefield effect, you could play this and make all of your creatures that creature, and then play the creature you want to enter the battlefield to get the effect. Like, you can do random stuff like that. You can play it as an instant when someone's attacking you to change your creatures into larger ones or ones that are indestructible or something like that, and that's another good use for it. I mean, you can turn these into large creatures to attack in for the kill. Like, there's just so much you can do. It's very versatile. It's a lot of fun to play. Mortify, of course, is going to be one of your removal cards in the deck. It's going to get rid of a creature or enchantment. Putrefy, going to take care of an artifact or creature this time around. Brave the Sands. This is a fine card in this deck. It's going to help you feel more confident about your attacks because you're not going to have to tap your creatures to attack, and also they can even block an additional creature each combat. So this is really another card to encourage you to attack. I do find it a little counterintuitive that it can block an extra creature. That feels like a little different than what they're usually trying to do in these multiplayer sets where they really want people to attack a lot and often. But this card is encouraging you to attack, so I guess that's a good thing. Cathar's Crusade, another enchantment. This one costs 5, doesn't do anything on its own, so again, I'm usually not a huge fan of those. But again, I think that can be fine in a multiplayer game, especially considering the size and scope of this effect. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you get to put a counter on each creature you control. So again, works really, really well with some of those token generation cards that we've seen in this deck. Citadel Siege, fun card from Fate Reforged. Like, you probably won't use the dragons portion very much in this deck, or at least in a multiplayer game. Occasionally it will come up. You're probably usually going to use the cons, but another way to just grow your creatures quickly. Hardin Scales, we kind of knew it had to be here, right? Like, this is kind of one of the more fan favorite cards of recent days. Maybe not as powerful as some of the others, but it is very cheap. Just costs 1 to put it on the battlefield. And then whenever you're going to place a +1/+1 counter on a creature that you control, you get to put an additional one on. Nice touch to adding this to the deck. Bred for the Hunt. Again, very similar to some of the other cards we saw, but this time around, creatures that have the counter, if they can do combat damage to a player, will let you draw cards. So they get the curiosity effect built in. And this is another one of those cards that's going to help you draw, help you keep getting into some heat. You have enough evasion that I think you'll be able to at least get a little bit of damage across here and there to get the card draw. All right, let's move on to artifacts. Now, a lot of these are going to be mana fixing artifacts, and that's what we see here with the first one, Astral Cornucopia. Simply, a lot of the times, this is going to be simply a 3-mana rock that's going to tap for a mana of any color. Can be very, very useful. It gets better later in the game if you have more expendable mana. Cauldron of Souls. This is a very good defensive card. I've been talking all along about how this deck could be a little bit weak to certain board sweeps, and you have some board sweeps actually right in your deck. And you can even protect yourself with this card. So this is interesting because what it's going to do is it's not going to really prevent your creatures from dying. I mean, they're still going to lose their counters, but you're going to be able to bring them back with a -1/-1 counter on it. So all your creatures get persist. At that point, hopefully, you'll be able to cancel out those -1/-1 counters with +1/+1 counters. And that's kind of a weird rule interaction if you're not familiar with it. If a creature has a -1/-1 counter on it and it's going to get a +1/+1 counter, instead you just take the 2 counters away and it has no counters. So you do basically cancel out the -1/-1 counter. So next time around, you can actually use this again. The creature will again come back. So having said all of that, what this is going to do for you is if you play a board sweep, then activate this, yes, you did lose your counters on your creatures, but at least your creatures are still alive, and hopefully you can start rebuilding pretty quick. This also will prevent opponents from playing board sweeps some of the time if this is sitting out in the battlefield. Commander Spear. This was around in last year's Commander decks, and very good card. It's a 3 casting cost mana rock, and you can cycle it later, which is fantastic. Darksteel Ingot, and another mana rock. This time it's indestructible. Nothing wrong with that. Felwar Stone, a classic card from the Dark. Yes, sure, there's a little bit of variance. It's based on what your opponents are playing, but hey, you're in a multiplayer Commander game. You should pretty much get your pick of colors, right? Now we've got some signets to look at. First, we'll have the Golgari Signet. Then the Orzhov Signet. You get a Simic Signet as well. And of course, what Commander deck would be complete without a Soul Ring? One of the most powerful cards ever printed. In fact, it's my first pick in a Vintage Cube, even over Black Lotus. It's just that strong. Now, again, it's not going to be quite as backbreaking in a multiplayer game, obviously, especially if everybody has one. But this is just a fantastic card. I will say I'm glad they always print these in these Commander products, because if they didn't, this card would probably be quite pricey, and it's an incredibly strong card. All right, let's move on to the non-basic lands. And again, most of this is going to be mana fixing. We have Arcane Sanctum for 3 colors. We get a bounce land with Azorius Chancery. You get Command Tower. Pretty typical. I mean, not always included in these decks, but a lot of the time. Next, we have Darkwater Catacombs, one of the filter lands from the Odyssey set. You don't see these all the time. I actually forgot all about these. And yeah, this is an awesome inclusion. I mean, you always think about the filter lands from Shadowmoor block because, of course, they are legal and modern. But this is great. Fantastic card to kind of dig a little bit further into Magic's past to bring up. Dreadship Reef. I believe this is one of the Time Spiral battery lands, if I recall. But this can be quite good. And again, storage counters can be doubled with some of the cards that we have seen today. Evolving Wilds. Great color fixing card. Exotic Orchard. Kind of like the land version of Felwar Stone. Again, it will do a lot of work for you in Commander. Golgari Rot Farm. Of course, another bounce land. Murmuring Bosk. This one surprised me a little bit when it was revealed, and like I said, there is a little bit of kind of a toughness matters deal going on, but I think a lot of people saw this card and thought maybe we'd be getting a reprint of Doran. Unfortunately, we didn't get that, and we actually didn't get any Tree Folk in this deck to be able to play this untapped, which is kind of funny, but even without Tree Folk, it's still a great card for mana fixing. I mean, basically gives you 3 colors. It's a pain land if you're trying to get white or black out of it, but you can get green for free, basically. Really awesome card. Opal Palace, another kind of classic Commander product card. Great for mana fixing. Also kind of boosts your Commander a little bit with a counter coming out of the gate, which completely makes sense for this deck. Another tricolor land with Opulent Palace. Sandstep Citadel with another one. And yet another one with Seaside Citadel. Then we have Sungrass Prairie. It's another one of the Odyssey filter lands. Temple of the False God. Again, this has showed up in past years too in Commander products. I mean, sure, it's not quite an ancient tune, but still very good, especially in multiplayer games. Terramorphic Expanse. Pretty much the same card as Evolving Wilds, but great effect. And our last non-basic land of the day is Underground River. Of course, one of the Pain lands. And you know, hey, a blue and black Pain land, that's not bad value. I'll take that. Alright, let's move on to some basic lands. Now, if you didn't see a few days ago when they revealed the basic lands, they look amazing. They did a cycle by Rebecca Guay, so basically one of each land. They did a cycle by Kev Walker, and they did a cycle by Mark Poole. Took 3 artists that were instrumental to the history of Magic, bringing them on board to do these lands. They look incredible. It's sad to me that they're not full art basic lands, but I totally get it. You can't put full art basic lands in these products and expect them to get in the hands of new players. And that's the thing with a product like this. Older players that have played a long time enjoy these. They have fun with them. I know I do. But a lot of the appeal of this product is also to engage new players. And if they put something that's almost too coveted, unfortunately, people start buying them up and trying to flip them, and it just doesn't allow them to get into the hands of the casual players. And that's a big problem when it comes to engagement and getting new players into your game. So I totally get it. Okay, we can't have full art basic lands, but it makes me sad still. So anyway, you're going to get 5 planes. I'm not sure like the distribution in each deck, what that's going to look like as far as the different art from different artists, so that'll be kind of interesting to see. But they are so good looking. Even if they're not full art, I kind of think these are going to hold a little bit of value too. You're going to get 4 islands. You'll get 5 swamps. And finally, 7 forests. So that's the deck list. And like I said at the top of the show, this one looks a lot of fun. Like, I'm looking forward to trying this one out. It just looks like it's one of those decks that you do have to kind of bide your time a little bit, but it just starts to snowball after a while, and your opponent's kind of blank, and the next thing you know, you have giant creatures attacking them, right? It just seems like it's going to be a lot of fun to play. So having said that, we'll be back tomorrow with the Open Hostilities deck list, which is one of the more aggressive decks out of the 5 probably. So we'll take a closer look at that. But until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality content for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't yet had a chance to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.